Now to our breaking news. A Russian jet has forced down a U.S. drone over the Black Sea after damaging its propeller. CNN's Oren Lieberman is at the Pentagon gathering details on this. Oren, tell us what we're learning about this.
Brianna, this played out early this morning over international waters of the Black Sea, according to U.S. Air Force Europe. An MQ-9 Reaper drone, a U.S. Air Force surveillance drone or spy drone, was flying over the Black Sea when, according to the Air Force, two Russian fighter jets conducted what they're calling an unsafe and unprofessional interception. That's just the beginning of it. According to the Air Force, the two Russian Su-27 flanker fighter jets repeatedly flew in front of the MQ-9 Reaper drone, apparently in an attempt to disrupt or disturb its flight pattern, even dumping fuel in front of that U.S. Reaper drone. And then, according to the Air Force, one of those Su-27 fighter jets damaged the propeller of the Reaper drone, forcing it down. The propeller on a Reaper is behind it, so somehow that Russian fighter jet managed to damage the propeller, forcing the U.S. to bring down the drone in international waters. Of course, this is a very severe incident, and U.S. Air Force Europe issued a statement essentially referencing how severely they view this. Let me read you a part of this. This incident demonstrates a lack of competence in addition to being unsafe and unprofessional. These aggressive actions by Russian aircrew are dangerous and could lead to miscalculation and unintended escalation. According to the National Security Council, President Joe Biden was briefed on the incident earlier this morning by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. So he was given that information about how this played out earlier today. According to the NSC, there have been other interceptions between Russian and U.S. aircraft, but none as severe or as potentially escalatory as this, where we see an actual collision in midair between a Russian fighter jet and a U.S. drone that forced down the U.S. drone. Of course, the key question now, Brianna, how does the U.S. respond? How severely do they view this, and how deliberately do they view this? Certainly the statement from U.S. Air Force seems to say that the Russians were very deliberate in flying in front of the drone, dumping fuel in front of the drone, and then damaging the propeller, forcing it down eventually in the Black Sea. So now we'll wait to see how the U.S. chooses to respond to this incident. We have also reached out to the Russian Ministry of Defense for comment. Brianna?
And Oren, just to be clear, of course, the Ukrainian port city of Odessa there on the Black Sea, we don't know specifically where this happened?
It's our understanding, and it's worth noting, that we have been able to track the flights of many Reaper drones over the Black Sea over the course of the war and before, and they essentially fly an almost circular pattern, either in the western part of the Black Sea there, west of Crimea, or southwest of Crimea. We don't know exactly where this happened, but we have seen Reaper drones flying almost on a daily basis since the beginning of the war, and even earlier than that. We know Russian jets have flown as well. Of course, what's different here is the interaction, frankly, the collision between these jets. U.S. Air Force says it happened in international waters where both the U.S. and the Russians are absolutely entitled to fly under international law, but not like this. Brianna?
Certainly not. All right, Oren Lieberman, live for us at the Pentagon. Thank you. Let's talk about this now with General Mark Hertling. He is a CNN military analyst, former commanding general, U.S. Army Europe and 7th Army. And David Sanger is with us as well. He is the White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times. All right, General, first off, just explain how significant this is.
This is typical of shadowing and intercepts in Europe, Brianna, truthfully. What you see is Russia does this all the time in international airspace, on top of international waters. Russia often considers the Black Sea their national lake, which is dead wrong. It doesn't apply that way. But you will see Russian aircraft continuously having these kinds of intercepts or shadows, but nothing like this. Airplanes get close. You certainly will see, there have been years where there are over a couple of hundred of these kind of things, incidents occurring every year, and it's normal procedures. But when you get this close and you interfere with flight paths of other aircraft, either manned or unmanned, it's certainly not under international law, and it's certainly going to create quite a distraction in this campaign. But as Oren just said, it's in possibly in western Black Sea region to the west of the autonomous region of Crimea. It's just Russia, again, interfering in international airspace with other aircraft.
David, how do you think the U.S. government is looking at this as they're trying to figure out how to respond?
Well, I'm pretty sure, Brianna, they're going to respond pretty calmly to it. I think they will denounce it, but it's an unmanned aircraft, and that means that fortunately there are no casualties. And I'm sure that President Biden is going to be thinking that what he's trying to avoid here is, of course, is an escalation with the Russians. Remember, his first goal in this war has been help the Ukrainians. His second goal in this war has been avoid escalation and anything that could lead to World War III. Now, we've had surveillance craft taken down before. The most famous case in modern times was a Chinese collision with a manned American surveillance craft in international waters, as in this case. The Chinese pilot ended up being killed in that incident, and the Americans survived but were taken captive for a while, eventually returned to the United States. This does not rise quite to that level because it's unmanned, but it nonetheless tells you that the Russians are now willing to take more risks to push back on the American involvement in the war. And the question is, where does that end?
Yeah, where does it end? And certainly the U.S. is considered with escalation, concerned about potential escalation here, as we hear from the Air Force General. But I wonder if that isn't sort of the point. And I also wonder if, from Vladimir Putin's perspective, something like this happening in the Black Sea is perhaps good for him, a place where he has suffered some embarrassment, right? When you think about the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet being sunk.
I would not agree with that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
Please, Mark, go right ahead.
No, I would not agree with that, Brianna. I think this is baiting. I think a pilot made a mistake. They were trying to, like Lauren said, intercept, which means escort and see what's going on. But when you clip an aircraft to cause it to either land or crash, then you've got a different situation right now. Yes, Russia has certainly been embarrassed in the Black Sea with the sinking of several vessels by a country that doesn't have a navy, that's Ukraine. But certainly when you're interfering with international aircraft in international airspace, that's not purposeful. That's baiting and it's interception. This is not something that where, again, Mr. Putin is trying to puff up his chest a little bit and says, see what I can control in the Black Sea. These Reapers were more than likely not only looking for intelligence, but also overwatching some of the grain fleets that are going through embargoed territory out of Ukraine into the Bosporus and up the Donau Canal. So these are things that are all parts of this. Again, all this is conjecture on my part, what that Reaper was doing there. But certainly when a Russian aircraft interferes, clips it, and knocks it out of the sky, that's a little bit more serious. And we haven't seen one of those things happen since this war began.
Yeah, this is incredibly serious. And I wonder, David, how Vladimir Putin might respond to this versus how he might see this as something that obviously should be avoided. But how he might respond to this, you wouldn't expect that he's going to come out and give some heartfelt apology to the U.S.
No, he's certainly not. And, think about the more recent case of the balloon, really another kind of surveillance vehicle that was over U.S. territory. And China complained when the U.S. took it down. But of course, in that case, it was clearly over U.S. territory. The key part here is this was in international waters. One of the big questions that Mark raises here, and that you do as well, is what's the level of intention? In other words, did Putin himself order this? Did the Russian military order this? Was this a Russian pilot who saw an opportunity and was sort of acting on his own? We may not know that, or it may take us a while to go figure that out. My guess is that right now the administration will denounce it, but that you won't see them take a similar action. And the reason for that is pretty clear. Putin has until now been pretty cautious about keeping the war inside Ukrainian territory. There have been some cyber attacks on Poland, but other than that, there has really been no case we've seen where they've gone into NATO territory, where they've shelled into that kind of territory. And I don't think Putin wants to bring NATO into this. So my guess is that both sides will probably cool it down, even while declaring themselves in the right.